Welcome, everybody. This week, we're extremely lucky to have Dr. Indigo Holcombe-James with us. Indigo is Head of Research at ACMI, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, so our fantastic screen and screen culture museum in Federation Square. Indigo's an experienced qualitative researcher. She has a PhD in media communications from RMIT, and she's published widely on digital communications, museums, and digital inclusion, topics that we'll be discussing later. Indigo is the author of the forthcoming book, Cultural Institutions and Digital Inequality. And perhaps most importantly, Indigo is also a Swinburne graduate too, and studied at Swinburne many years ago, which is where I first met Indigo. So Indigo, thank you so much for chatting with us today and sharing some of your expertise and ideas about audience research.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're very, very excited about this, so thank you. Indigo, can I start off by asking, what does audience mean to you in your current role, and how does ACMI think about audiences?
Well, audiences are at the very centre, I guess, of my job. So I'm Head of Research here at ACMI, and that means that my work spreads across the whole museum. So I think of my job as being quite flat, distributed across that way, rather than up down. And according to our most recent museum strategy, our commitment is to place audiences at the very heart of our decision making. And a big part of my role is to pull together the data and the insights from our audiences that enable that across the museum. So we think about our audiences through, I suppose, a range of different data points. We can think about them through ticket sales or biometric door counters on our exits and entry points. But we also think about them through qualitative and quantitative data sources that we collect directly from our audiences themselves. So we run a series of different studies across each year. Some are intended to, I suppose, think about audiences as they are contained within a financial year, who they are, what they come to do with us, and what they might take away, what kind of impact we might have on our audiences. Whereas other studies are much more tightly kind of bound to particular questions that we are trying to address at particular times. So that might mean running a series of focus groups around exhibition ideas that we have for future projects and seeing how they kind of land with people. Or it could be running a series of workshops with visitors around what they think the museum should be doing about a particular topic. Or, yeah, we're really committed to listening as much as possible and to embedding that into our processes.
Wow, so that's really quite a few different touch points that you have on your audiences and quite a few different methods that you use as well too. So do you mind just stepping us through, like the future audience research that you do, the people that actually come through, and then is that how you do it, like in stages, the evaluation at the end, or? Yeah.
Yes. So maybe there are two things that I can touch on. So across each financial year, we run 3 separate studies that are like post-visit surveys. So one is for our museum visitors. So these are people who are often just walking in from Federation Square or off Flinders Street. They don't necessarily have a ticket, and they're probably mostly going to our free offer. So we don't have their email address. We don't necessarily know their name. And so we a part of our visitor experience team, who are what other museums or galleries might call invigilators. We've trained them up in intercept survey methods. And so there is, on a couple of days a week, there is someone at the exit who will invite our visitors to take a survey. And that's kind of collecting demographic data. It's collecting insights into what the experience was like, as well as kind of trying to gather a bit about what might bring somebody like that back, whether it's a kind of topic of interest or we were just talking before, we're really interested in what streaming platforms people are using at the moment. So we're collecting some information about that. So that's an in-person intercept survey that happens at the exit. The other 2 surveys that we run throughout the year are for our cinemas. So we have 2 cinemas at ACMI, and we find that they are an extremely different audience to our museum. So they are a completely different group of people. There is not as much crossover between museum and cinema as we would like, or vice versa. And the benefit of the cinemas is that people are having to buy tickets to that. So we can send them a post-visit email and we invite participation that way. And the third long-running study that we do each year is with our public programs. So again, most of these are ticketed. It's a post-visit survey via email. So that's kind of just ticking along in the background all the time. The museum has got access to live data dashboards so that they can see the data as it's coming in. And at the end of the financial year, we write up an enormous report that brings all of that together, and we try and do some kind of segmenting around either sometimes we look at it through demographics, sometimes we look at it through kind of psychographic lenses, but often we look at it more closely through programming lenses. So we have a series of streams that we're interested in across the museum, public programs and cinemas, and we try and kind of bring together what we know about people who engage with each of those kind of programming streams. And I can show you some slides around that if that's useful too. Okay, so this is one of our programming streams that we're interested in, which is video games. You might have seen that over summer we had our major temporary exhibition was called Game Worlds, and this is data from last financial year, so it's before that exhibition was open, but we were interested in understanding a little bit more about who they are and why they're coming to Melbourne. So this is kind of who they look like. We know that they are predominantly local. We know that they are really quite young, 61% between 18 and 34 years old. 29% speak a language other than English, and 35% are born overseas. At ACMI, we're really quite proud of how young and often culturally diverse our audiences are, and that's quite different to a lot of museums and galleries. We also collect information about access requirements, and prior to my joining the role, we just asked people if they identified as having a disability, but we now ask all visitors, whether they identify or not, if they've got any access requirements. And we know that around 20% of our audience has an access requirement. So we have a real commitment to accessibility and ensuring that we are designing wherever possible to engage multiple senses. And to help us do that work, we commission folks like the experts at Arts Access Victoria to come through and do kind of lived experience research with us to help us understand how an exhibition, for example, plays out for someone who's in a wheelchair or is neurodiverse or is blind or has low vision or is deaf or hard of hearing. Our cinemas audience is totally different, as I've already mentioned. They are much, much, much more local, and we're quite interested in the rise of increasingly local cinema. They are much more likely to be repeat visitors. They're coming much more frequently than our museum audiences might be, and they are much older than our museum audience, as 54% is over the age of 55. And they're mostly coming to see a film that they can't see elsewhere. So we know that ACMI's cinema draw is that it's a unique kind of programming offer, and it's not necessarily driven by new releases. We are also really interested in families, and we know that they come with a whole set of different needs that we need to make sure that we are catering to. We also know that we kind of under-index in terms of family groups visits compared to other museums, like Melbourne Museum, for example, have a much higher proportion of museum visitors coming in a family group. But you might know that we currently have an exhibition on called Play School, Come and Play, which is designed for 2 to 5 year olds, and it is truly glorious. And then next year we will be opening an exhibition all about Bluey, which I think will change this quite dramatically.
That's going to be huge.
Yes, it's
Can't
very
wait for that one.
exciting. We also have a thread of programming around music that we are especially interested in. And I mentioned also that so much of our audience is under 35. So we are kind of obsessed with thinking about who they are and what they are coming to do with us. And then thinking about industry. So who works in our field and what do they want to do with us. It's at the very beginning when concepts are getting developed up, we might do focus groups with people who we think are the kind of primary audience for that particular thing, and we'll be asking questions like, you know, what comes to mind when you hear this concept? Would you come? Do you imagine yourself coming with other people? Who are those people? And what would you expect to see? That then kind of helps flesh out the concept development process that's run by curatorial and exhibitions departments. And then once a concept gets greenlit, by the board. We then run a formative kind of market sizing piece of research, and that's usually a predominantly quantitative but also some qual questions survey that we will do with about a sample size of 1,000 to 2,000 people, and that's trying to get deeper into what the size and scale of the market is, again, what their expectations are, what kind of price sensitivity that audience might have, etc., etc. That is used to inform conversations around pricing, ticketing targets. What else do we use that for? Building out, I suppose, the curatorial framework, thinking about what kind of objects or experiences visitors need to have in the space so that we're definitely meeting their expectations. And that kind of spreads through. It might also be things like how much do people imagine spending on merchandise? What kind of merchandise would they want to see? So we also work with our retail team to support the shop's development of those offers. So that happens in the development stage. Then the exhibition is developed. We work through that process. And now we're at opening day. And from that point, we run a thing called rapid research, which is a mix of a survey in the space that visitors can scan a QR code or get the post-visit EDM and respond to. And during this phase, we're collecting demographic details to know who's coming through, but we're also asking really specific questions about, did anything not work for you? Did you understand this bit that we were a bit like iffy on? Or if there was one thing that you would change, what would it be? So we're kind of collecting all of that information, and this is in the first 3 weeks. At the same time, we're running ethnographic observation sessions with members from the curatorial and exhibitions team, where we kind of create structured observation sheets for us to go in and like really spend time watching and engaging with our audiences while they're in the space. That is supplemented also by the observations of our visitor experience team. So they are in the space all of the time. They are the closest people in the museum to our audiences, literally in real time. And so after every day during that 3-week period, we go along to the visitor experience guides debrief session, and we collect all of the observations that they have about what might be working, what's not working, etc. And at the end of that 3-week period, we run a cross-museum team workshop where we identify anything that could change immediately to respond to any of that feedback. So an example might be for Game Worlds. One of the interactives was a speed running game where visitors could verse a famous speedrunner on Celeste, and we heard from that the responsiveness of the control wasn't quite up to scratch to some of our expert visitors, and so we worked closely with the technology team to improve that as much as we possibly could. So there are like the things that we call like learnings for now, things that are going to be changed within the exhibition run. And then we also identify learnings for later. So they are things like that might be too big or not possible to change for whatever reason, maybe too expensive, licensing agreements, for example. And so we build them into a document that we call our experience principles. And that's to be referred to as we're developing up the next exhibition. So what we can't change in this one, we're hopefully bringing into the next one. During that period of rapid research, I also work to commission folks like Arts Access Victoria, as I mentioned, to come through and do that lived experience research with us around what does it mean to navigate this space with different abilities. And we do a similar process around what are the learnings for now and what are the learnings for later.
That's fascinating. I mean, what you've just described to us is such a rigorous and deep, process of trying to understand the audience from as many vantage points as possible. And you and the team obviously invest a lot of time and thought into this. And so I think that's just really incredible, and that we can learn so much from that. I mean, museums have really changed a lot in terms of how they think about audiences, haven't they? And the kind of craft and profession of audience research within museums has really, really developed. And I know that's something that you've looked at for quite some time in your own research too, for your PhD and the work that you've done with other institutions outside of ACMI. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, about your own research and how that feeds into your current role here at ACMI.
From the 1970s onwards, we see a real shift in how museums are thinking about the visitor and how we engage with them. And that kind of is accelerated by the introduction of digital technologies, because I think that creates the visitor more as a participant, like they're actively engaged within the space. They're doing stuff. I suppose what I find interesting about my current role is that it remains very rare. In Melbourne cultural institutions, I know of, including myself, 3 permanent full-time positions, and that's across 3 separate institutions. So although there is increasing focus on audiences and government sort of settings put ever more pressure on us understanding our audiences and increasingly to understand our impact, there are very few organisations that are fully equipped to do that work. And one thing that I'm quite obsessed with at the moment is we also don't have a kind of, as a sector, a really defined and I suppose ratified approach to impact and how we might understand and articulate that also. So that is something that kind of is a challenge, I think, for the sector and increasingly for smaller institutions. ACMI is a state-funded institution, but we are the smallest of the state-funded spaces. And it's really tricky to do this work. Before I came to ACMI in 2023, and before that, this role didn't exist, and any kind of audience research was, it had to be commissioned, and it was done by external companies like your Morris Hargraves McIntyre or PwC or Colmar Brunton, and we have seen a real shift in what is able to happen internally when that work is embedded and when that work kind of knows the teams and is able to like be part of the process of using the research rather than simply delivering a report.
For our students who are interested in this space, how should they be thinking about potential careers?
I have found it really interesting coming in-house, and after a mini academic career where I was working externally to cultural institutions, and I thought I kind of understood them. I thought I knew how they worked and what they did, and that I understood the barriers to what I was interested in specifically was digital transformation. And I thought I got it, but working internally within the cultural sector, I now realise I was very naive, and the dynamics within the space are so much more complicated than I think can be observed externally. And so if I could do it again, I would really, really try and get into the visitor experience teams. These are often more junior roles within museums or gallery spaces, but you learn so much just through the kind of ethnographic process of being in a space, understanding how visitors engage with artworks, etc. It's quite remarkable how many of our curatorial team at ACMI once were visitor experience guides, and you can really tell that they have that background, that they understand the way that audiences move through a particular space, how long they're going to spend with a particular object, or what kind of questions they're going to ask of an interpretive strategy. And I think that the same is true from the audience side. I work really closely with the BX guides, and we have been able to turn some of those roles in the past into more research associate positions where there are ways up and through the institution in that way. So I would recommend doing that for sure. In terms of like upskilling, I wish that I had done more quant when I was at uni, and built up that skill set, because that is a large part of my job now, and I'm always learning, which is exciting and fun. But yeah, I think they would be my 2 recommendations.
So they're like guides and Sherpas and also researchers, because they're watching you at the same time and feeding that back.
Exactly. Yeah, they're a pretty amazing team.
Yeah, fantastic. This is so interesting. So I think, next time any of us walk into a museum, we're going to be much more conscious of all of the work and thought and planning that goes into that space and into understanding us as audiences. So that's incredible. And just one last question, Indigo. So now you've written and thought a lot about digital access and inequality in cultural institutions. And in fact, you have a book coming out on this topic very soon. I was just wondering if you could step us through some of your ideas and your research on this topic and where it's taken you.
The thing that is constantly important to my role and how I think about audiences and access is that museums are a lovely addition to people's lives. We are very rarely the kind of focus or a mandatory part of people's existence. So for us, it is really important, I think, to make sure that we acknowledge that we are not the kind of central thing that we would like to be, but that acknowledging that really means meeting our audiences where they are and making sure that we are doing that work from a place of empathy, but also with a real focus on how we can be of service. I think Professor John Falk is a visitor studies researcher, and he argues that we need to, rather than looking to our mission or the legislative acts that establish our institutions, we should be talking directly with our communities to understand what they need and what they want from us, and how we can best serve that, I think, is the thing that I take forward.
Oh, that's a very inspiring way to finish our conversation, Indigo, and I think it just really shows the the ethical nature of the work that you and everyone at ACMI does, and everyone in the sector as well too. So I think that's incredibly important. And while taking your point that people have many other things going on in their lives aside from museums, but museums also can be a real space of awakening and change, and people have life-changing experiences in museums all the time too. So anyway, so we're just so grateful for the work that you do, and thank you for sharing that, giving us all a sense of the depth of your work here with our class. So thank you so much, and we'd love to have you back next year as well. Thank you, Indigo.